Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my fellowship, which actually finished officially in 2016. The report, though, was not submitted until very late in 2017, and I will explain why when this is not being recorded. I have never before experienced government censorship. So that's another discussion. I know. My fellowship builds upon an earlier ALTF grant, known as the BLAST grant, where we established national standards for good learning and teaching practice with sessional staff. I'm not going to talk about those standards in any detail at the moment, but really give you just an overview of what happened with the fellowship. An important part is that I use the term sessional staff. And that's a very, very specific choice, not just by me, but by sessional staff around Australia who have come up to me and said, I do not want to be called casual. There is nothing casual about how I approach my teaching. I am not casual in my approach to how I act. I am a professional, and so we definitely went with the sessional staff concept. This took many years to develop and agree upon, but for that very, very reason, to respect those staff. It is also a broader umbrella term because it covers not just the casual staff, but what others would term as contract staff, and given that this is going international, it covers adjuncts and many other terms that we use. So with my fellowship, there are a number of intended outcomes, but it was really to disseminate and embed the sessional staff standards for quality learning and teaching across Australia and test them further and beyond Australia, and also move beyond the government higher education sector to the private sector as well. So, first of all though, I just want to flip this around and ask you one thing. Could anybody here in this room give me one fact about sessional staff in their organisation, please?
You have too many of them.
We have too many of them. How many is too many? That's not a fact, yes. So I'm asked a fact. Okay, I'll get one here from Keith and then we'll go up the back.
Underpaid.
That's not a fact unless you give me the numbers, yes?
Curtin University employs more sessionals than ECU.
Okay, there's one fact, okay. That's something. Look, the reason I ask that is it illustrates how little we know about our sessional staff still. A little bit. Not a lot, a little bit. It's just over the majority. I once was in a forum where there were 50 executives, DVCs, higher university executives. I gave them homework, and the homework was come to this forum with one fact about sessional staff. Out of the 50 who sat in a room similar to this, one person could give me a fact. It does not bear well. How do we progress? How do we support our sessional staff if we don't know who they are and we know so little about them? That's just a point I'm trying to make. That's my politics for today. No surprises here. In terms of how we work with the fellowship, there are three key frameworks that I'm passionate about and that I believe work, including distributed leadership and embedding reflective practice. Okay, so we had a whole lot of dissemination strategies in place, and I'll just tell you about those. Now, you don't need to even read that. You can look at that later on the PowerPoint. Okay, so what do? We started with statewide fora. First one was in Brisbane, and we brought sessional staff, we brought university heads of subjects, course conveners, program conveners, and with many of them we also try, ideally you want to have people from across a whole university layers of authority, really. We want a multi-level approach, a distributed leadership approach. So the most successful forums were ones where we had people from university executive to heads of faculty, to heads of programs, to subject conveners, to the people who taught and the sessional staff, you know, in all of those beautiful layers. And we received beautiful outcomes from those. That's another story. So we started off in Brisbane and Perth. Remember that? That's good. Yep, Sydney, we had a very, very interesting one. And Canberra were the main ones where we had fora. Oh, no, Melbourne. Move that down. We did Canberra. No, Melbourne. And so, yeah, we should have done Melbourne. And Melbourne, we brought people from Tasmania and Adelaide across. So fora where people would benchmark, engage in activity on the day to benchmark their institution against the standards. People often came in very confident. At one wonderful fora, the executive from HR were strutting around. I could do a reenactment. Oh, we're so good. I'm just looking to see if anyone's here from there. We're so good. We've just invested $300,000 in a sessional staff portal. You know, we're going to be getting ticks of good practice for everything we do. Well, that went downhill by the afternoon because what happened was we learnt through their self-assessment, through benchmarking about how good they were, that when they shared their report with everybody else in the room from the different layers and levels of the university, we had faculty deans, we had headed subjects put their hand up and say, what portal? And then the sessional staff saying, we've never heard of it. We nearly had a revolution. I had to stop them stampeding the executive. But they learnt that they needed to communicate, talk to their sessional staff and others. A good outcome. At the same time, I applied for an extension grant with the OLT, and we held our second national summit on sessional staff where we were awarding and recognising and sharing good practice. So that was very successful, engaging 37 institutions at that time. Throughout my whole experience of working with sessional staff, there's only been one university in Australia who never got involved, and I'll tell you about them off record. Everybody else has been involved and engaged in some way. At the same time, when we were in the fora, we encouraged people to undertake small action research projects. There's some examples there. And the photo at the right there is Kelly, who worked on one and then submitted what they had done to the National Summit, and they were recognised as a finalist for their good practice. So we were definitely supporting people in developing good practice, in supporting sessional staff, but also in sharing that good practice. An aim was to engage the higher education private sector, and I was successful with COPFI and HEPQN. I'll give you those acronyms later, but unsuccessful with ACPET. That's a long story. But we started to engage them, and there are some excellent practices, surprisingly, in the private sector. In a few only. And here's an example. One of them also was recognised as a finalist in the BLAST Award. So practice in general is very ad hoc and diverse. Some pockets of really good practice and not. Wanted to test the BLAST standards internationally, and CEDA in the UK were fantastic and ran workshops and found that the standards are applicable in the UK. We only had to change one word in the whole framework, which has many words, to make it relevant to them. The advantage of benchmarking with the standards that we've developed is that it acts as an educational tool. People realise, oh, we're tracking as bad practice. You know, what can we do to achieve good practice? And they can look at the standards and learn about what is good practice. So it's very educative. So that was fascinating and went really well too in the UK. Went to Europe and did the same in Spain, and that was fascinating again because Europe has really not tackled the sessional staff issue at all. In fact, in general, some of their practices are frightening. That's another story. And they've got a lot to learn from that as well. So what's happened? Europe is actually seeing Australia, and the UK is seeing Australia as leading the way, which is interesting. And we have seen that people who have adopted the BLAST framework to inform good practice are being recognised, and I've got examples there of various citations that different universities have been awarded. Yeah. And remember, this is all based on TEXA initially asking permission that they wanted to endorse the BLAST framework on standards for sessional staff. There's been a lot of dissemination coming out of the project as well. So lots of good reading, people, if you haven't read those as well. Keep those in mind. However, I have been tweeting during your sessions. If you send me on my phone, it's not that I've been distracted, I've been tweeting about your sessions, and at the same time somebody has tweeted back that there's been a slight decline in our reliance on sessional staff in Australia, slight, and wondering why that is, and it sounds like it could be because people's budgets are being cut. But in general, our reliance on sessional staff is predicted to at least continue, and some people are saying even increase. So it's embedded. It's a part of the academic workforce. I've asked you to provide me with a fact about that cohort. People don't have facts. It's entrenched. It's embedded. It's institutionalised. So what are we going to do about it? Okay, well, I've got a few suggestions. We need to know who our sessional staff are, and that means working with HR to have systems in place that record that data. We need to support sessional staff with professional development. So the example we've just heard from science is a really good one, because we just do not do that systematically enough. We need people to keep benchmarking with the BLAST standards, I say, so that they are aware of what needs to be done. And importantly, it's the university executive who need to really make a commitment to this, and they are not at the moment. One of the reasons is that we don't offer a good cost-benefit analysis. No one's ever done the costing on sessional staff. That's going to be my next research grant. What is the real cost of not supporting them? You know, so I've given examples of a drop in attrition rates in one department, and I've had several universities around the world do back-of-envelope costings. And we're currently working on an assumption that sessional staff are cheap. I think that might be a false assumption, but we're not going to know until we do the hard facts and get the hard data, and that's what I would think we need to do next, because otherwise our DVCs and all the other executives are not going to listen to us. Okay.